Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our post-lunch session here on the second day of the 2016 PACE. And this one promises to be a most informative session. And leading us through what is going to be a masterclass this afternoon, we have Christina Lynn, whom you all know, and Larry Schneider, who of course was Christina's predecessor here today. So I'll let you, Christina, introduce. We know the rest of the panel now, do we not? Vanessa from Denver, Colorado, and Rachel, who is kind of multi-continental, really, aren't you, in your approach to life? But we're going to have a discussion now facilitated by both Christina and Larry. Would you please make them both very welcome? Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And as you arrive, if you wouldn't mind coming to sit at the front, that would be fantastic. So we're on a mission today. We've only got 1 hour, and we have a lot of things to achieve, as much as you're willing to put in, and we can facilitate with the 3 people up on our panel. So the format of the masterclass, and I'm going to have to be very tough on the time, is that we're going to do a introduction, first of all, to the actual topics. The topics came about from a questionnaire that Parking Australia put out to the members and to the delegates of this event to understand what are the 3 things that are most concerning to people in our industry at the moment. And we filtered and distilled those topics into 3 main topics that we actually now want to address as part of this masterclass. So we'll have a 5-minute introduction from each of the panelists on the topics, after which we will break up into 3 groups, hence why we needed you to gather around. And we're going to use the flip charts so as to summarize the outcomes of those discussions, so that at the end we can develop a draft of a manifesto for each of those topics, which then Parking Australia will take on to continue that conversation with the members and with the industry, so that we can eventually publish a proper manifesto on those 3 topics. We did distribute a few days ago an example of a manifesto that was issued by the Times about how cities should be made cyclist friendly. So we're just using that as a bit of an inspiration and as a bit of a guide to what we want to achieve, even though the topics that we're going to be discussing have nothing to do with cycling per se. One thing that we want to make sure is we don't get caught up on the wordings of these items that we're going to come up with, but just on the general feelings and the general situation of where you are today on that particular topic, where do you want to be, and I think we should have a time frame that's fairly realistic, so say 1 to 2 years, and what then are the things that are stopping you from getting there, so that we can identify some of these points as per that manifesto. So these are the 3 topics, and just to give you a very quick introduction, one of them is about parking requirements, and therefore what does the academic debate say about minimums and maximums and Don Shoup's and all those types of philosophies with what the actual realities are of dealing with parking supply and provision of parking within developments. And so what is that relationship then with the overall transport environment, and how can the parking industry engage with that public sector to achieve a good outcome that's specific to that particular location at that particular time? The second topic is about the value of parking. We all know that there's no such thing as free parking, and therefore how do we manage the expectations of the community with regards to paying for parking, and how do you manage parking demand by actually using pricing as one of the levers of that equation. And the third topic is about technology, and therefore how does technology then facilitate us achieving those objectives. So hopefully the 3 manifestos eventually will be merged into one, and we'll have a fairly kind of easy flow from one topic to the second and to the third. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Rachel, who will have 5 minutes to sell her main ideas on the first topic, and then we'll continue with the other 2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So So with minimum and maximum, I guess it depends on the location, and there are a number of things that you may consider when you're deciding to go for minimum standards or maximum standards. And that might be things like access to public transport, what kind of development it is, what's planned for the area in the future. So this is just an example that I took from the Gold Coast City Council when we were doing some stuff on the Gold Coast Light Rail. So we were saying like a hotel, currently it's one space per room. We may aspire in the future to only have pay and display car parking, and then there are different kind of types or kind of stages as you go through. So it may be that in the future there's only one space per 3 rooms, and people have to pre-book their car parking well in advance of their holiday to ensure that they can park their car. How would you do this? So in doing a kind of planning, you would understand, look at the options, do your cost estimates, do an assessment. I can't see the rest of...
You can see them on the printer. It's really
on the draft. Do a kind of draft, and then have your final kind of implementation plan for your minimum and maximum standards. So what are other people doing? This is what they're doing in Austria with some car-free developments. So it means that you can look at these on the app. So really kind of looking holistically at how you develop a building and kind of residential units, providing for all modes, and then not having to have as much or any car parking. This is an example of the Royal Cornwall Hospital in the UK. So any staff living within 1.5 miles of the hospital are not eligible to park on the site unless they have certain criteria, maybe children or an elderly relative who they care for. They have all the kind of park and ride and the car sharing or carpooling, and lots of different kind of schemes so that they could really reduce the number of car parking spaces they were going to provide. This is an example from Copenhagen. Bart Ingels, he's one of those rock star architects. This is a development right next to the train station, going straight into Copenhagen, and obviously you can see lots of bicycle parking, and then just a few car parking spaces on a surface car park. So residents are encouraged to almost not buy a car if they're going to live in the bicycle house. And then an example again from the UK. This is Greenway House. It was donated to the National Trust in 2000, and as part of their development application, or they're making it into a holiday kind of attraction to go to, all cars had to be pre-booked 24 hours in advance, because it was only accessible by like narrow winding country lanes, and the council said you can't be increasing traffic congestion or the number of cars on the roads in the area. So they had to do lots of other things like working with the bus, kayaking companies, steam train, rowing boats. They built their own pontoon to get people there because they had very stringent parking regulations.
Perfect. 3 minutes and 22 seconds.
Yeah. Making up for going over earlier.
I just want to deal with parking pricing. We obviously can talk about it for several hours, but I really want to just focus in on 3 main issues, and this is particularly directed to local government rather than to the private sector. I think the first thing we need to recognize is that demand for parking is increasing at a much higher rate than the supply is increasing. Just to give you an idea, we have 1,000 more vehicles a day every single day of the week, 7 days a week, that are registered. So more than 365,000 vehicles a year coming onto our roads. There's certainly not that increase in parking. What we do see, specifically in urban areas, is that not so much that we have a supply problem, but that the parking is not managed as effectively as it should be. If you go around any urban area, any city centre, any commercial centre, you'll still see a lot of bays that are reserved for certain users that are not being used. There's a huge amount of parking vacancy that could be used in in a better way. Why don't we manage parking the way we price other things? Councils tend to set a price at the beginning of the year. That applies Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. And if you ask them, why don't you have a price in the evening? Why don't you have a different price on weekends? Oh no, it's too difficult. It's not. The technology is there. It just requires a bit of application. I think one of the biggest things that local government should consider is maybe whether to outsource the management of their parking. It could be done more effectively. So that's the first issue, really dealing with parking demand. What are the hurdles to pricing parking? Obviously, there's a community expectation of free parking, and this is something we really need to change. Even sports facilities that are owned by councils now are upping their rentals, they're charging for different services, etc. We expect to pay for all kinds of municipal services except parking. We still have this attitude that parking should be free, there should be plenty of it, and it needs to be right outside the destination that I'm going to. So we need to constantly be working on the community expectation, and that's not asking people whether you want to pay for parking or not. We all hate paying for parking, but it's explaining to them what are the alternatives if we don't start charging for parking. We're obviously saying to people there are other forms of accessing city centres. Well, again, we need to look at how convenient those are. It's not always easy for people to ride in or cycle in. It's a nice concept, it's a good aspiration, but it's not always something that can be done. Probably the most significant hurdle to the implementation of more user-pay parking in local government is the political weakness. I often get asked the question, with respect to all of you in the audience today, but I do go in and we're asked to plan a strategy for a city council, and my first question is, and I know some of you are laughing, Erica, but my first question is, has the council got the balls to make the changes? Because invariably that is what holds things up, and I can see a lot of you nodding here. How do we change the political weakness? Often we got told, over my dead body is there going to be paid parking introduced in our area. But yet those councillors are more than happy to pay for parking at airports and various other facilities that they go to. That's an attitude that we need to change. It's changing too slowly. From an aspirational point of view, I think a lot of our parking systems are far too complex, far too inconsistent. You see people driving around areas looking up at signage, trying to work out, is this 15 minutes free? Is it ticket parking? Different rates apply at different times. We could make things a hell of a lot simpler and more consistent, so that you go into an area and you see a zone which says this is a ticket parking facility, it's $2 an hour, it applies at all times, and you can pay in various ways. I think it's also important that motorists feel that they are receiving some value for money. It's unfair to expect people to pay for parking when the parking facilities on and off street have got potholes, there's stuff lying around, the lighting is poor, they don't feel safe going back to their car at night time, etc. So we've got to be prepared to invest, and sometimes it's better to invest up front and then start charging for parking, rather than to start charging and build up resentment before we introduce pay parking. The other criticism that I made, and I made at the panel discussion the other day, is unfortunately each parking provider tends to promote its own facilities. That doesn't suit the customer. That's from a supplier's point of view. Each parking provider has their own app. The City of Perth have got a brilliant parking app, but they don't indicate all of the other parking that's provided in the City of Perth. It's only their car parks. So if you look at their car parks, and one or two of them may be full, you don't realise that there could be a lot of other parking that's available at better prices or more convenient to your destination. Sorry? Yeah. That's it. Just to give you a couple of issues to think about when it looks at pay parking.
Thank you.
Is that 5 minutes?
Alrighty, Christina's got the hook out, so I better be fast. And on our last subject matter, technology, which should only take a minute anyways, because there's not a whole lot going on with technology. What I put together here is a couple of slides just to walk you through some of the key changes that are happening in our industry. Again, our purpose today is to develop this manifesto, so these are just questions to get you thinking about that purpose. I can't see the slides. So thinking about proximity, people are moving back into cities. So how does where we live and our proximity to each other going to influence and impact technologies and advances in moving people? And how can we work with other industry partners like urban planning to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve on this one? The second one is demographics are shifting. There was a recent study by the U.S. Chamber that asked millennials about their transportation and access preferences, and 66% said that transportation choices and access to transportation was in their top 3 of where they would like to live. So this is a millennial generation that's thinking about this in a broader context. So how is technology influencing who is making purchasing decisions as our demographics are shifting? The world is increasingly connected. I think we heard several great presentations over the past couple of days about data analytics. Rachel talked this morning about how in the next couple of years Facebook will be moving into and basically opening up a whole new world of buying power. So how does this move towards personalization and technology companies understanding every single piece of our characteristics and our purchasing decisions? How is this going to shape technology and be shaped by technology as well? The next one, the sharing economy, and I think the slide is titled as Gaining Traction, but as we all know, it has gained traction. People are becoming more and more okay with sharing. As I mentioned earlier, about millennials, they're making decisions not to purchase cars, not to purchase homes. They're delaying these decisions based on a wide variety of different types of things. As we think about the future, are they going to be less, is it going to be less desirable for them to actually purchase things and own things? And will people be okay with sharing? And how will that completely transform the world in which we live and how we access places? Transportation systems are getting smarter, and we all know this, and we've heard some great conversation yesterday and today about autonomous and connected vehicles. But as transportation systems are getting smarter, are we getting smarter as well, and are we caught up, and are we prepared for the cultural shift that's going to need to happen to go along with as technology is enhancing and increasingly getting connected? Are we ready to step away from our passion and our attachment to owning things? And the last one here, just for some food for thought, is redesigning for the future. There's a lot of conversation about how can we repurpose some of our facilities and some of our built environment as use shifts. How can we design new facilities for other uses? And some of the images up here, this one is from a parking structure in Miami that was designed partially for parking, but partially for large, very high-end events. Again, extraordinary price tag that came along with this, but thinking about it on a practical level, how is this going to change our built environment? And this was from a great student project that's turning, I think it was in Atlanta, Georgia, that's repurposing parking garage into micro-housing units. So how are advances in technology impacting our built environment, and how is that going to impact the way that we think about moving people to and from places and their access to places as well? So I think that's my slide. Hopefully it was 5 minutes. Yes, sorry. Good deal.
Thank you. The reason why we wanted to keep all that short is because we want to make sure that you guys all get to talk and exchange ideas. So I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to take a group and sit in front of the flip charts and get the conversation going. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for the input and taking the time. It's not a lot of time available, but at least we've got some conversation happening. And as I said at the beginning of the event, this is just the beginning of the conversation. So we'll keep this going through various communication channels to make sure that we end up with something that everybody's happy with. So I'm going to get Rachel just to go through the list that her group came up with. And if anyone from any of the other groups has any ideas or inputs as we go through, please put your hand up and we'll try and incorporate any other comments from the rest of the people here.
So the first thing that we're going to do in our group is we're going to have, or everyone's going to have in the manifesto, a campaign to make car parking sexy. So people said it's pretty unsexy. People just go in, pay, go home. And so to really kind of demystify some of the things that people don't know, that car parking's really cool. And so we're going to tell them through this Parking Australia campaign. And then we're going to have the Make Parking Sexy guide, which will have some case studies and examples of really cool stuff that's happening, and then some case studies and examples of some things that may need a little bit of work to make them better. You're also going to explain in that guide some standards. We're going to explain some kind of parking myths. We're going to make sure that there's kind of fairness for the community and things are equitable, explain the codes of conduct. We're going to take an example from the UK where they have a data dictionary where everyone's collecting data and there's some kind of similar formats and they can share them. And then we had another project at the end, which is where a TAFE adopts a car park and the art students can paint the stairwells so that the car park is more user-friendly. That's it. Cool.
Does there anyone have any comments on any of those items or something they'd like to contribute, maybe an example or some idea that might make that more meaningful or more realistic or more able to become a reality? Anyway, have a think, and once the other two presenters go through their points, then perhaps we can have a little bit of additional discussion until the time that we have to close up. Thanks, Larry.
Hello. I'm hoping you can all read this to some extent. This is at a far more base level than the previous one, but and you'll notice the numbering. So we put out a bunch of ideas and then we altered the prioritization. It really is dealing with price. At the end of the day, we felt that one of their aspirational goals is to really explain the true opportunity cost of parking. There are a lot of people, both customers, elected officials, and others who don't really understand the true cost of parking. And if they did, they might have a more sympathetic appreciation to introducing cost. The second one in that first grouping is that we actually need to provide more information and data and educate people better about the costs of parking and increasing demand and some of those other issues that were put up on those slides. So not only to elected officials, to retailers, etc. And I do go back to Vanessa's keynote address about communication yesterday, where I don't feel that we sufficiently communicate what our problem is. We say, look, there is no such thing as free parking. We jump into it straight away without actually letting people know. The third one in that group is that pricing is to achieve policy objectives. It's not always just to maximize the income. There are other objectives that we want to achieve, whether it's to encourage short-term parking or to reduce congestion or to encourage mode share transfer to public transport or cycling. There are a number of policy objectives that we don't sufficiently explain to people as to why we want to introduce pay parking. A lot of people think you want to introduce it and you just want to raise a whole bunch of money. That can be an objective, but it's not necessarily the only one. So those were the first three goals that we'd like to try and achieve in the next, within the next 2 years. And then the others, which I haven't really fixed the numbering of, is from a local government point of view, one of their single biggest problems is that they do not have the flexibility to amend prices in response to demand. Prices are set As I said earlier, at the beginning of a budget year, they then go up by CPI every couple of years, and that's it. It doesn't bear any relation to change in demand. If an area gets popular, prices should possibly go up. If the popularity of an area declines, we should put prices down. So this is an important area to dispense with this fees and charges, local government regulations. And the City of Melbourne just indicated that they're actually going to be introducing this early next year using technology. The second one is to clarify the costs and income from parking. Again, we're not transparent enough. What does it cost? I think very few people realize that it costs $25,000, $30,000 to provide a parking bay in a multi-deck car park. You get newspaper articles which say council must provide more parking. People don't realize that someone's got to pay $30,000 a bay for council to provide it, and that's usually the ratepayers. And the final one is we agreed that parking is provided in so many different ways and there should be more consistency, and councils should be given the opportunity to benchmark their performance against outsourcing it. Maybe the outsourcing should be more common, instead of having the problem that we have with a lot of councils at the moment, where we've got one department running on-street parking, another department running off-street parking, another department running the infringement side of things. It could possibly be done more effectively by outsourcing it without necessarily losing control of the prices. So these are 6 aspirational goals that we'd like to see in a manifesto, and which we feel certainly there could be some progress made within the next 2 years. Thank you.
I've actually got a point to add to your list if the group agrees with that. And I think I'm just using the hypothecation discussion that we had earlier. And I think that particularly in a public government sector, if we can make sure that the money that gets raised for parking is actually devolved to that particular community for particular users that people can actually relate to and associate with in terms of outcomes and improvements to the overall well-being of that community, then I think everybody would feel that whatever money is going into the parking, or at least part of that money, is actually being used for things that are tangible and seeable. And this is one of the main philosophies, I guess, of the Don Shoup philosophy of parking. And perhaps this is something that we should try and integrate into our objective, is to say that some of that money needs to be devolved in some way that people can actually relate to it, whether it's to improve the environment, improve the public amenity, or even improve the parking themselves and make them more sexy, so that at least there can be some direct correlation between the cost and benefit.
Our group was tackling technology, and I have to say that I was very proud because every item that we came up with really came back to the customer and improving the experience and using technology to do that successfully. And I think that our list, while very linear, would actually function much better as an infographic, so you're going to have some creative flexibility for me. So the first one we talked about was integration, seamless access, for the customer, and flexibility of solutions as well, to make sure that as the pace of technology is changing so quickly and things are coming down the pipeline, that we are able to be flexible enough to integrate new solutions and provide a seamless user experience. Number 2 was information sharing. We talked a little bit about this in relation to data and analytics, so being open with the data that we're collecting for the benefit of the larger society, again, and to go back into creating a consistent experience. And I know that as a lot of us have proprietary technologies, this is a challenging idea to consider, but again, our group went back to information sharing to help the good of the world through access and open communication. Number 3 was identifying key stakeholders and customers that we want to support through technology, innovation. Number 4 was security, was quite a conversation, making sure that as providers of technology, that we are keeping pace with those out there who are looking to use the data that we're collecting for not so good reasons. So making sure that our data security is keeping pace with everything that's constantly evolving out there in the world. Number 5 was identifying key partnerships both in and outside the industry. And I think this goes back to, again, data sharing, access to information, identifying other companies beyond parking and the transportation industry that we could integrate with to, again, I think the term yesterday was used, kind of a frictionless experience for our customers, that they can move through the world and it takes away that experience, that anxiety and the frustration of having to pay for parking if it's all just done in a seamless environment. To the slides earlier about, kind of redesigning the built environment, we talked a little bit about parking as a hub that supports other uses. So right now, people typically travel to a parking garage or a car park, and they're there, they leave their car and they go somewhere else. But the integration as we look to the future of the built environment of parking assets being a destination that integrates other use, whether it's childcare or things like that, that can be right there at the parking. So parking not as a transition point, but as a hub, and using technology to do that. And then also the last point was making sure that our technology that we're developing is not obsolete. So designing parking systems that support and are supportive of the driverless car environment. So making sure that, again, that our technology is keeping pace with what's happening in the rest of the world. So these were similar to Larry's group. Ours were much more aspirational goals that we'd like to see in the next 1 to 2 years from a technology standpoint.
Well, thank you. Has anyone got any ideas or any items that they'd like to contribute to this session now? Or I would really appreciate it if you thought of anything over the next little while, send us an email and we'll be putting this into some kind of communication to go back out to the community very shortly so that we can get this conversation happening. I think there's a lot of really good points have come out of that, and some things that I think we can actually work with in terms of either advocating or working with our members to see whether we can make some steps forward and then report back to you guys as things progress. But I hope you found the session interesting, and we are finishing exactly on time. So the project management skills are being put into effect, and hopefully the project success will be showing through eventually. So thanks everyone, and thanks to Vanessa, Rachel and Larry.